I'm Noah Abrams, and welcome to The Days Between, the show where I talk to my friends, people I admire, and people I want to better understand about success, failure, happiness, and misery, as well as all the other elements that make up a life well lived. Along the way, we'll look at mental, spiritual, and physical health, and when life didn't go as planned, the steps they took to get themselves from A to B and beyond. This week, I'm speaking with Allison Moorer. It would be easy to look at Allison's life and focus on the details, but in doing so, one may miss the larger picture. As a singer and songwriter, her efforts have earned her an Academy of Country Music nomination, a Grammy nomination, and her debut single was nominated for an Oscar. Allison has released 11 albums and has also appeared on several collaborations and toured extensively. As an author, she has written 2 books. Her first, Blood, a Memoir, began in part as the result of a silent spark ignited by Dr. Maya Angelou. The book documents her journey towards understanding a family tragedy that on several levels defies comprehension, but as she states, is a defining moment, and in some ways defines everything about her. Her second book, I Dream He Talks to Me, is a love letter to her son and explores her experience raising a child with what she calls extra challenges and the gift of earned wisdom and opportunities for grace parenting presents on a daily basis, through heartache as well as victories, both big and small. Allison is a musician, she is a writer, she is a mother, she is a sister, and she is a daughter. She carries all these titles and a couple more, which you'll hear through the course of our conversation. However, if one were to take a few steps back and look at the collective sum of the roles she plays, it is clear Allison Moorer is above all else an artist, with her greatest work being her life. It is my privilege to present Allison Moorer on The Days Between. So I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee with Allison Moorer. Allison, good morning.
Morning.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Now, you have professionally made a name for yourself in Nashville, but you are not from here.
I am not.
Where are you from?
I was born in Mobile, Alabama, and was raised mostly in Washington County. Very rural situation. When I was about a year old, my mama and daddy decided to move from Mobile back up to where he had been raised, a place called Frankville, middle of nowhere. It's just one of those greasy spots. You know, there is no red light. There are a couple stop signs. I think they're both in front of the churches. One store, one post office. That's about it.
Any siblings?
I have one older sister, Shelby. She is 3.5 years older than I am.
What kind of kid were you?
That's a good question. I was a worried kid and also a kid who was desperate for love and comfort and safety. Couple of those things I got here and there, but not in a consistent way, which made me learn how to isolate. I read a lot. I played piano a lot. I was very interested and concerned with school because those things gave me comfort and safety. I was probably much more complicated than anyone realized. One of the earliest things I learned about myself came from my maternal grandmother because she had the saying, if you want somebody to remember something, don't tell Lynn, my mama, don't tell Shelby, my sister, tell Allison. She's the one who will remember. And so that sort of tag of I'm the responsible one really stuck to me. It took me decades to start to realize that had been put on me and that I needed to shake it.
In your 2019 memoir, Blood, you said of your parents, love is rarely a simple concept when people get their hands on it. And it certainly wasn't simple in our family. It was there, but it wasn't a grounding force. It was something we chased. It was the piece of paper and not the paperweight.
So in my family, I have figured out that anger was the paperweight. It sort of weighed down everything. Love was conditional. That was the message. And I say that because though I think parental love is often and mostly unconditional, how we show love is often not that. My daddy was an alcoholic, at least an alcoholic. I think he might have had some other things going on. Who can say? He died when he was 44. And I have a lot of unanswered questions about who he was that I have to live with. I'll never get those questions answered. He was an alcoholic. He was violent. He was an angry person. So that was the main emotion that permeated our household. I remember being very afraid of him, and sort of, the mood of each day hung on how he was doing. So, clearly my parents had a very codependent relationship, an addicted relationship, a dysfunctional relationship. So those were my earliest memories and models, and I've had to do a lot of work to start to swim through those. And that passage that you just read is me doing that.
You describe your mother as sunshine that God sprinkled a little bit of salt on.
Yeah.
You go on to say that her absence takes up more space in your memory than her presence. You can't get a good hold on who she was because the truth is you didn't know who she was.
Mm-hmm. I remember a whole lot about who my mama was physically because, well, I think one of the main reasons is she was a warm person. She was a very good mama in the ways that she could be. Her relationship with my daddy made her unreliable as a parent because he was very needy. He was always pulling on her. He was, I think, in fact, envious of the time and care that she provided to my sister and me. And because they had the relationship that they did, she often came to my sister and me with less than she probably wished she had had to offer us. Having said that, she was incredibly warm, and she was always very quick to wrap us up in a hug, or she was very affectionate, and very free with I love yous. And she came from a family that could express affection and love. I think because of that, those physical memories of being safe and being pulled close by her are ones that I keep close to me. So I remember her body. She was tiny. I think she was 5'2", 5'3", somewhere in there. Not very big, not very big at all. But she was beautiful. She had the most gorgeous skin, these bright blue eyes. She was blonde. She just was, and she had great style and could run up a garment on the sewing machine one night and wear it to work the next day because she was always, working somewhere, always having to work hard to provide.
You mentioned in the book that you can never ask your father about his thoughts on literature.
I think one of the reasons that I am such a person of words in my adult life is it's not only because I love them and find them fascinating and am a bit obsessed with language. It's also because as a child, I felt muzzled. I never knew if I was going to say the wrong thing, if I was going to say something that would set my father off, because that did happen to me, And so I learned to be afraid to use my voice around him. So part of the reason I don't know what his favorite books were is because I was afraid to ask. I just sort of had to scan our shelves. I didn't want to do anything that was going to upset him.
And he was physically abusive with your mother and your sister.
He was.
But not you.
Not me. No.
Do you think there's a reason for that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple reasons for that. My mother and my sister protected me because they didn't hide the way I did. I got out of the way, and I learned to do that very early. My sister very much put herself in his path, and I very much tried to keep myself out of his path.
What other ways did your father's drinking and the abuse affect you? In the book, he mentioned body dysmorphia based on his comments.
We never know what something we might say or do to someone is, how it might affect them. You know, I gave a workshop on memoir writing the other day. And one of the things that's fascinating to me about memoir is it's just a little piece of time. Someone asked me, what is the difference in memoir and autobiography? And to me, memoir is just a piece of time. It's not the whole thing. It's just a slice. And one of the things I was talking about in this talk is how to figure out what your defining moments are. I think there are obvious things in our lives, and I think that there are things that are not so obvious in our lives. And I was talking about how to find those things. Someone had snapped a photograph of me as a child eating a pork chop in the living room of our house. I mean, just like gnawing on this pork chop. But anyway, this picture exists and I have it. And I thought, I was sort of studying it one day when I was writing Blood. And it took me back to that moment. I was in 4th grade. I had a short haircut. I remembered the shirt that I was wearing because my mama made it for me. I had this short haircut that I was trying desperately to grow out from a haircut that she had insisted that I get the summer between 3rd and 4th grade. It was really short. I didn't like it. I didn't want to have my hair cut short. I don't know how this all happened. I just remember I saw the shirt, I saw the hair, and I was immediately taken back to a moment during the end of the year. There was something going on in the classroom at school where everyone had to put their heads down on their desks, like some kind of gift was getting passed out or something at school. Had to have your head down on your desk, and there were girls' gifts and there were boys' gifts. And the helper that had come in to help with this could not tell if I was a boy or a girl. And it was devastating to me. So that photograph made me remember all of those things. And from there, I had to dig into all of those messages I got when I was a kid from my family, and particularly my father, that involved femininity and what we're supposed to look like. So that was a long-winded way to answer your question. But I got a lot of messages from him. Not all the messages were about this, but a lot of the messages that he delivered to me that were about what I looked like and that I needed to look a certain way in order to have value. Not an uncommon theme, So I had to wrestle with that. And I carry it with me. I was one of those early developing girls. And my father noticed, and I think it made him uncomfortable. And so he began to tease me about it. And even though I was a very skinny sort of 12-year-old, when I started to get boobs and a butt, I think it freaked him out. So he started to make comments about my weight, which was in no way too much.
Do you think he was teasing you to tease you, or do you think that was his attempt to try and relate to you?
I don't know. No idea. Maybe I hope some of all of that.
You use a word in the book, bell heavy.
Love that word.
Can you define it for me?
My best friend in the world, a woman who became my best friend right after my parents died in 1986. She and I connect over this feeling, which is the heaviness you get in your stomach when something's wrong, when you feel homesick. We used to call it the pit because it's like this empty feeling in the pit of your stomach. And I did some research on that, and I found that there is a Creole saying for that feeling, and it's bell heavy, BELHEVI. And it's just the most beautiful description of something that feels so bad. I'm glad there's a word for it.
How often was that feeling present growing up?
A lot. I think, and here's something that I hope we're moving toward understanding better as human beings. Children aren't not absorbing every bit of information that happens at home. Why it's taken us so long to understand this, I don't know. we see so many societal ills that can be traced back to parenting, exposure to certain things or trauma or whatever it is. You would think that we would be learning these lessons earlier. I hope as a society we can start focusing on how to fix these problems before they start.
You mentioned your parents' death in 1986. How old were you?
14.
Can you describe the circumstances leading up to that?
Well, it would depend on where we would want to start. The circumstances leading up to that would have been when they met in 1965. My parents met because my daddy was teaching English at my aunt's high school. My mama has a younger sister, my Aunt Jane, who I lived with after they died, by the way. I'm very grateful to her for what she did for me and my sister. So they met because my daddy taught English at her high school and she was in his study hall. And my mama had been married before, very briefly, and had gotten divorced and moved back home. So my aunt was in his study hall and she had decided that he and my mama needed to meet. So this was her matchmaking. So she devised a plan and they ended up meeting. They ended up dating. They got married in 1968. My sister was born in 1968. And here's a very important thing to say. My daddy was a frustrated artist. He wanted to be a musician, wanted to play music, was obsessed with music, was always trying to figure out how to do more of that rather than work at a straight job. When I look at it now, as a kid, I was like, why can't daddy keep a job? As a 49-year-old working artist, I look back and go, well, of course he didn't want to keep a job. He wanted to play music. Now, was he talented enough to do it? The truth is no. The truth is no. But he still had the want to. He wanted to make art, but he also wanted to live in a more bohemian way than our very small-minded Alabama community would allow. I can see that now. I couldn't see that as a kid, and I don't know what sort of friction arose between him and my mama because she was more worried about having a stable life and he was not. I think there was a lot going on that I had no idea about. I just sort of absorbed the tension, the friction, the anger, the violence, the drinking, everything felt like a tightrope all the time, sort of always checking the temperature of things. We lived in a dry county, so that meant daddy was out late at night. He was always at some bar that was far away. So, he would stay out late at night, but he would also bring home cool records. One of my earliest musical memories is hearing Wanted, the Outlaws record, the collaboration that Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson and Jesse Coulter and Tom Paul Glaser did. That record is imprinted in my memory. So that's all to say that even with all the craziness, there was a lot of good craziness because as violent and sort of just messed up as my father could be, he also would bring home records, always made sure there were instruments in the house. He had a workshop that was detached from the house where he could weld, he could build anything. He taught shop. He was very well read. He had books in the house. He, had us paint the walls of his workshop. There was a lot of encouragement to be artistic. So with the crazy, there was good. And I'm just trying to be balanced here. As the years went by, daddy's drinking got worse, not better. And by 1986, it had become really untenable. Couple that with the fact that my sister was then 17 and she had had enough, just simply enough, of living the way that we lived. She was angry about it. My mother was angry about it. I was angry about it. We were all sort of detaching in our own ways, My sister graduated from high school in May of that year, and just a sort of chain of events happened that just got really ugly. My mama ended up finally leaving and renting a house away from my father. So long and sordid story short, things just really fell apart to a level that they couldn't get put back together. And I think it really broke my father, and who knows what his thoughts were. But he had, unbeknownst to me, lost his job, on top of a lot of events in our immediate family happening that made it impossible for my mother to justify living under the same roof with him anymore. And he decided to kill her and kill himself. I don't know how long it took. It could have been 3 seconds. It could have been 3 months.
You mentioned that you think he may have had mental illness. Do you think he just snapped? Do you think it was finally the job and losing your mom?
I do. I think he did snap. Because I also know that he very much loved her and loved us. The decision that he made to kill himself, kill her, and leave us, it's hard for me to say that anyone who is not mentally ill makes that choice, however long it takes. Doesn't matter if it's 3 seconds or 3 months. That's not something a well person does. So I have to extend that to him and feel that.
And you're 14 years old at the time, correct?
I was.
And you went to live with your aunt?
I did.
What was high school like for you?
A blur. You know, in a way, living with my aunt and uncle was a relief. And I remember feeling on the night that my parents died. They died in the wee hours of the morning. I think it was probably about 5 a.m. Though I didn't have a clock, so I didn't look at the time. By that night, as I was lying in a bed at my grandparents' house, I thought, well, that's over. Okay. That's finally over and I don't have to worry about it anymore because I knew that it was going to end that way. I just knew that it was. And I had known that since I was about 10.
So there was a sense of relief.
There was a sense of relief. 2 weeks after they died, I moved to a new town, Monroeville, Alabama, which was where my aunt and uncle lived. I started a new school, and my paternal grandmother died. And I met my best friend, who's still my best friend, who I'm convinced my mother sent. It was a lot to live through. I was very practiced at acting okay by that time, so that came in handy. And I remember aching just for my mother's presence. Missed her very much. But I was able to go to sleep at night and not worry about hearing fighting. And that was what I was trying to concentrate on at that moment. I was able to have friends who could come over, or I could, do things after school, which I had never been allowed to do or never had the opportunity to do. So as a 14-year-old, it was, yes, a relief. I mean, honestly, as a 49-year-old, it's still a relief because the truth is, if my parents had lived, and of course I would choose that, no matter what, I would choose for them to have not died when they did, and certainly not the way they did, they would still be here and probably still be very dysfunctional. And my life would not be what it is.
At the time, having those feelings of relief on a practical level of not hearing fighting, not living in the situation that you were living in, but at the same time, missing their presence. Was there any guilt around that?
Sure. I still have guilt. I have survivor's guilt, particularly where my mother is concerned. And that plays itself out in all kinds of ways, from buying Vogue magazine to, pretty coffee cups or something.
Tell me about the magazines.
Oh, I write about this in the beginning of Blood. Each section starts with 5 what I call interstitial pieces. And in the beginning of part 1, there's a page on magazines. My mother wasn't very good with money. She was that woman who could go to the Rite Aid and buy $100 worth of stuff. And this was in the early 80s. And, she liked to feel good. She was very feminine. And she wanted pretty things. And she wanted her house to be pretty. And, that's okay. It's okay for her to want those things. She would buy magazines. She couldn't have the real thing, but she could look at it in magazines. And it's a habit I still have. I mean, right now on my coffee table, it's embarrassing. I'm always trying to weed out and not subscribe. But it's one of my ways to stay close to her.
So you finish high school and you go to the University of Southern Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
What did you study?
I started out studying psychology, and my very first job was working for a psychologist. So I changed my major about 2 years in. I'm not sure if that was the right decision now because I've become so interested in how we develop and act and interact as human beings that, part of me wants to go finish that course of study now. But anyway, I had a job working for her. So I would go to class from 8 to 12. And then I would go to work at 1:00 and work until 6. So that was my day for most of my college until my senior year. Working for her, I sort of figured out that it wasn't probably what I wanted to do, sit and listen to people all day long. So I changed my major to communications. I ended up with a degree in public relations and journalism.
And you graduated
Mm-hmm.
and you moved to Nashville to be with your sister.
Mm-hmm.
You've said that you didn't have any intention to write songs. You only planned on singing background vocals and that you wanted to learn to play guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And that you learned to play guitar on your father's guitar.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like being in Nashville with your sister?
I was so sick of school and so ready to start life that I had my car packed and my cat and her carrier in my car when I took my last exam in May of 1993. I'd moved out of my apartment and I left. I took my last exam and left from the school parking lot and drove to Nashville. And it wasn't like I had some huge dream to be a country star. I didn't. I wanted to be with my sister. She was, that made sense. She was making records. And I thought, oh, well, I'll sing backgrounds for her and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do for a job. Because one of my obsessions as a kid was getting a job that would pay me enough to support myself. Because I saw my parents struggle with money so much, I was like, I don't want to do that. I would do things like make budgets just based on what I heard things cost, crazy stuff for an 11-year-old to do. I can't. My son is 11. I can't imagine him being worried about that, much less having, this sort of having his ears out to figure out how much rent is.
Was that something for you to control?
Sure. And just something for me to, aspire to as a goal. Because, growing up, no one ever told me I needed to go to college. No one ever talked to me about those things. I remember asking my father when I was in 9th grade, I had come across a flyer at school about the University of Southern Mississippi. And I took it home and I knew he had been to college. And I thought, Daddy, I was thinking about college. What do you think? And he said, that's fine, but you don't have to go if you don't want to. Which I found out later, his parents had insisted he go to college. And not only did they insist he go to college, they made him go to Auburn University. And they said, we'll only pay for it if you get a teaching certificate, because they thought that was a stable job for him to have. So he had all this baggage wrapped up in his college experience. Well, he didn't tell me about that. He just said, you don't have to go if you don't want to, which was, his way of correcting that in his own life.
Do you think that was his attempt to try and protect you from what he experienced?
I think it was his attempt to try to make sure his children did not grow up in the sort of rigorous confines that he did. He was made to go to church every Sunday. He was even a youth minister. He was raised in a very regimented way. You must present this way. You must know how to act. You have to look this way. You got to go to church. You got to go to school. You got to go to Auburn. You got to be a teacher. You have to, you have to, you have to. And I think he had other ideas and never felt free to explore them. I have come to understand so much about him that I didn't even understand when I wrote that book, because I just kept going and I kept asking myself questions. I'm lucky enough to be a working artist. No one makes me punch a clock. And I have empathy for him because I realize now as a grown woman, that's what he wanted to do. And he never had that opportunity.
You tell a story in the book about church and wanting to go and approaching your father about it.
That's a big event for me. That was a catalyst for change in thinking for me. I think I was 6 years old and I had counted up the Sundays that we hadn't been to church. My mama was raised in the Methodist church. He was raised in the Baptist church. Sometimes we would drive over from Frankville to Jackson, where her parents lived, and go to their church. But often we went to the Frankville Baptist church, where my daddy was raised going. He always went on Easter. every now and then he would wake up and shower and put on his chicken wire print suit, smelling like alcohol, and roll down there with us. I tell a story in that book about my mama and my sister and me going to choir practice at church and him getting pissed about it and even throwing a lamp through a window because there was something going on there that I didn't understand, some backstory with somebody or the choir director or whatever it was, something. He was very sensitive this way. Like somebody could say something and he would carry it. He would carry it and probably, he's carrying it right now wherever he is. He's carrying it like something somebody said. So he, I think, had told Mama not to go to church, not to take us to church, not to go down to Frankville Baptist for whatever reason, because somebody said something. And so it worried me because over on my mama's side of the family, the message was, you need to go to church. If you don't go to church, you're going to hell. So I'm worried about this as a 6-year-old. So I tiptoe across the, wet grass one Saturday night and peeked in his workshop and got enough courage up to hold my little hands behind my back and say, Daddy, it's been however many Sundays since we've been to church. Don't you think we ought to go tomorrow? Which I can't imagine what that must have been like for him to peer down and see his tiny daughter like shaking, asking this question about church. And then all the baggage he must have had wrapped up in all the messages he had received about church and what they told him, and looking at me and trying to figure out something to say that wasn't get back in the house. He might have said that too, but I don't remember it. What he said to me was, too much church is bad for you. And that's a message, man. And it's one I've certainly carried with me and considered deeply. Is he right? I think that depends on the approach.
So in 1993, you join your sister in Nashville.
Yes, let's get back to that. I went off, didn't I?
With no intention of writing songs. However, 1998, your debut single, A Soft Place to Fall, comes out. Robert Redford features it in his film The Horse Whisperer, which results in you earning an Oscar nomination the following year for Best Original Song.
Yeah.
Same year, 1998, you were nominated for an Academy of Country Music Award for Top New Female Vocalist.
Uh-huh.
And this is all with no intention of writing songs.
Yeah. Well, I think what happened was this. So in 1993, I moved to Nashville from college. I was singing background vocals for my sister. Then whatever tour she was doing ended. So I had to have money to support myself. So I got a job as a receptionist at a company here in Nashville and had things like benefits, health insurance, I had around that time met the guy who became my first husband, who was from Oklahoma, had been in bands, had been in the Army, but also film school. He was much older than I was. So growing up, I played piano. My mama was somehow scraped up the money to make sure that I got 6 years of classical piano lessons. So I always played piano. I was the only person in the family who could not play guitar. I learned a little bit of ukulele when I was really small, but I never got the guitar lessons. My sister played guitar from the time she was 8 years old, but for whatever reason, I never got taught the guitar. So I was determined when I got out of college that I was going to learn how to play guitar. So I got a Mel Bay chord book, and I had that 1964 Gibson B25 that my sister had that had belonged to Daddy. So I started learning chords on that guitar. And from there, I started having song ideas. It was completely unintentional. I never saw myself as a songwriter. So fast forward to the fact that I was learning guitar, that I was having song ideas, that I had met this guy who had been to art school and had all this amazing wealth of reference to teach me. At that time, I had never been exposed to bands like X. I didn't even know who Listen to Williams was. He exposed me to a lot of things that I would not have known about. So roll all of that together and, started making little demos here and there, which would get out to this person or that person. I could sing. I'd been singing my entire life. So that and the fact that I could write a little, and I was, 23, 24 years old and had big blue eyes, made a lot of things available to me. I met a guy named Walter Hyatt. He was a songwriter from South Carolina who had gone through Texas, the Austin scene, and had landed back in Nashville. Excellent songwriter. He did a residency at a place called The Sutler on Monday nights. So a friend of mine who had heard one of those kitchen demo tapes that I made, just guitar and vocal, suggested, you should go down and check Walter out, and I think y'all might hit it off musically. Long story short, we ended up being friends. I ended up sitting in with him a lot. He died in the Value Jet plane crash. There was a tribute organized for him at the Ryman Auditorium. I was completely unknown. And because his band knew me and his wife Heidi knew me, they threw my name in the ring to get to sing at this tribute. And so I was asked to sing a song of his called Tell Me Baby at this tribute. And I did. And for whatever reason, the stars aligned. And it was kind of the moment I got discovered. He had a childhood friend named Bobby Cudd who was an agent at Monterey, which is now has merged with WME. And this was years and years ago, but there used to be this agency called Monterey Peninsula. And he was an agent there, and he just took me under his wing at that moment. And he went to every meeting I had with every record company in town because things like this used to happen. I don't know if it happens like this anymore, but from that moment, there were a lot of industry people in the audience. And word gets out in a small town, this girl has this voice. And so Bobby Cudd took me under his wing. I ended up with a record deal. Tony Brown, who signed Steve Earle, Nancy Griffith, Lyle Lovett, the Mavericks, all these really cool sort of left of center things to MCA Nashville. He signed me in 1997. So I started making a record with my friend Kenny Greenberg, who I had been introduced to by a mutual friend. I wrote this song, A Soft Place to Fall, with my friend Will Owen, who's a Nashville songwriter, been here for years and years, done tons of great work. So just things fell into line that way, strangely.
In the book, you mentioned being younger and walking away from art, that you became focused on school, cheerleading while your sister was playing music, the rest of the family was playing music. Was there any part of you that felt any imposter syndrome, or did it just feel natural? Did it feel like the right thing that you should be doing?
My grandmother says I started singing harmony at 3. I was reaching up to the piano keys, playing the bass part on Little Drummer Boy and singing the melody before I could see them when I was standing up. I don't think making music is something that I made up for myself to do. As a writer, I have imposter syndrome, but making music, no, because singing is like, it's in my cells. It's how I knew and how I know to most immediately express myself.
Well, I want to read an excerpt from the book. And you say, art always reveals what I cannot see otherwise. Songs have shown me what I feel when I've been too numb, going through the motions of life without stopping to hear my own heart, whether on purpose or not, to get to the center of things any other way.
And that's both as a music maker and as a music consumer. I think that moment you're talking about is, I describe an epiphany I had. It's actually in a yoga class of all sort of embarrassing sounding things. I love yoga. I don't mean yoga is embarrassing. I mean to sort of cop to having an epiphany while on a yoga mat that's a cliche, right? It's very cliche. However, it's just a song that came on when I had a realization, because I was in the middle of writing Blood. That moment came right before I finished. I'd gone to a yoga class, and I was really wrestling with the stuff about my mama. And the song that was played at the end of the class, the part of the class when you get to lie down, my favorite part, the song that the instructor chose to play, I don't remember what it was now. Do I say in the book? I don't think I say. I probably couldn't remember. It made the message, and it was purely a message, she was protecting you, came into my mind. I think when we open ourselves up, or I think when I open myself up to create, you can't know you're doing this when you're young. Most of us can't. I think every now and then artists come along who do know it from an early age. They know when they open up, they're finding things. I don't think most of us know it until we get older and we realize what the process really is. And we learn how to have more respect for it than sort of dilettantishly going at it. I think it has always felt natural for me to make art because I did grow up around people who were making art, whether or not they knew they were making art. My mama could, as I mentioned, run up an entire garment one evening and wear it the next day. She was, she's the voice I hear in my head when I go in a store and I see something really simple that's overpriced because I hear her say, we could make that. If we needed a table, well, Daddy built a table. We didn't go down to the furniture store that was on the corner because there was no furniture store on the corner. It's an interesting way to grow up. The counter in our kitchen was a butcher block counter that he made, not someone else. So to have that experience is just a really valuable thing for a person who has creativity in them. How much creativity did I come with and how much did they instill in me? I don't know. And how much is it is my interest? I don't know. But I've never felt odd making music.
Well, between the time in 1998 that your first single came out, in 2010, you put out 8 of your 11 records. In 2008, you got a Grammy nomination for Best Country Collaboration. And in 2010, your son John Henry was born, of whom you've called your teacher, your greatest artwork, and the end of inheritance.
Mm.
Tell me about John Henry.
I am bewildered by the fact that I am John Henry's mama. The entire experience has been intense. He is, every parent says this about their child, he is a special creature. John Henry was born in 2010. I was 37 when I had him. He's now 11. He was very much wanted. His father and I very much wanted him. That's all to say it was not an accident. He's my first thought when I wake up in the morning, usually my last thought before I quit thinking consciously at night. He's mysterious, bright, funny, and loving. He also does not use words that I can understand yet. He was diagnosed with autism at 23 months. He had about a 6-month period when he used words from the time he was about a year old to about 17, 18 months. And then those words went away. I have heard him speak rarely since then. He is in a school where he receives 40 hours of therapy a week and has been receiving 40 hours of therapy a week since he was 2. So it's interesting to try to describe someone who has given no description of himself. He does not carry self-imposed characteristics. He has not yet been labeled with, well, John Henry is a baseball player, or he likes this or that. John Henry can be whatever he wants to be at any moment. He loves music. He appears to like art and color. He loves his family, his dogs. And it seems to like me okay, depending, of course, on the day. He is 11. It's getting to be that time.
With the challenges that come with raising a child who's autistic to the level that he has autism, and given the losses you've endured, do you think, or is there any part of you that feels like that challenge was necessary to counterbalance the loss?
I feel like it is interesting that John Henry seemingly has no ability to be codependent. And again, these are things I do not know. I've come to realize that people with autism aren't missing anything. They just get extra challenges. These ideas about autistic people not being empathetic or not having romantic love or love, these sort of antiquated ideas are antiquated ideas, and they're assumptions that are just wrong as far as I can see. But I'm not sure John Henry has the has a gear that he goes to, I'm going to call it that, where he absorbs other people's stuff. I know that he very much is affected by his environment. And I have messed up a couple times, and probably way more than a couple times, and said or done things in front of him that I should not have done, because I'm an imperfect human being, and all parents do things like that. We say things in front of our children we shouldn't say in front of them, or whatever it is. Meanwhile, they also feel things that we don't think that they're hearing, or, it's a complicated. There is part of me that thinks there is some sort of poetry to it. Yeah. That there is a deeper meaning to it other than the odds just fell on us. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I have a funny story to tell you about that, and this will sum it up. When John Henry was born, he had this weird mark on his abdomen. It's like this little divot, kind of little scar-looking thing. After a 30-hour labor, when they finally got that child out of me, and they're looking him over, they see this mark on his abdomen. And I'm looking him over later, and someone asked me, "Did you have amnio? Like, this is the weirdest mark?" I said, "No, I did not. I didn't have amniocentesis because I was afraid of the risks as a geriatric, pregnant woman, as they call you when you're over 35. And so when he was a baby, I was like, God, this is weird. He has this mark. It's so weird. I swear it's in the same place that Mama was shot. And I'm convinced all this time that it's a sign from her or God, or that he's marked in some way, and that this, mark on him means something because he was born with it." At a pediatrician visit when John Henry was, I think, 10, I asked his doctor, I said, "What do you think that is?" And she looked at me, she said, "A third nipple." I said, Exactly. It is all of it and nothing. It is a sign from God and a third nipple. It can be both. It actually can. It's a sign from God because it made me think it was a sign from God. It made me do all the thinking that's around a thing like that. It's also a third nipple.
You've credited an appearance on Maya Angelou's radio show with planting the seed for what would eventually become the book Blood, as well as the record. This was in 2012?
2010.
But you started writing the book in 2012.
I made some very early stabs at starting to write what would become Blood in 2010. I started what would really become Blood in earnest in 2012. It took me that long to find what the book was about. In 2010, I was asked to be a guest on Maya Angelou's radio show. Of course, I said yes. I went and did it. And we're talking like you and I are talking now. And anyone who knows anything about her probably knows that she did not have a very nice childhood. So we're just sort of talking about that. And she asked me about my childhood. And she said to me, "And now we have John Henry. What is it that you're going to tell him about your parents?" It's ironic because I said, I hope I have an answer by the time he's old enough to ask. I think he probably would have asked me by now. So as a side note, I do try to talk to him about these things and very gently let him know about who his people are. I don't not talk about my shortcomings, my feelings, or anything with John Henry. I just talk to him and let him know as much as I can figure out how to let him know about his life and his people and what's going on around him, even though I'm quite sure he already gets it. I just feel like sometimes I need to narrate, and I may not do it all, but I don't ever want him to feel like I'm not sharing with him. So I delivered to her one of those platitudes that I had in my back pocket. I think what I said was, their lives were much more important than their deaths, to which she replied, that's not going to get it. So I started thinking that I should figure out how to write a book. And I had never really tried to write prose before, except a couple times. My background was in like writing news items in college and writing press releases and not digging deep memoir. I had started writing just about sort of life in 2010 or 2011, sometime in there, after I had this conversation with Dr. Angelou. And I had been introduced to a freelance editor who I sent some very early pages to. And what she said to me was, this thing you're doing in chapter 2, which is where I decided to get to my childhood, she said, that's what you should be writing about. Not only is it the most compelling part of your story, it's where you do your best writing. I was like, oh. It was always a story I didn't want to tell. I always wanted to skip over that story about my parents. I always wanted to treat it as just another detail. And the truth is, it's a defining moment. And in some ways defines everything about me.
Was there shame around that?
Absolutely. So much shame. So much shame. And it took writing that book to make me realize I had it. First of all, much less that I needed to do something about it. It's not my shame to carry, yet I do. It was very hard for me to say, my father murdered my mother. My mother is a domestic abuse victim, as are my sister and I. There's so much stigma wrapped around all of it. This was not the image I ever wanted to project, that I come from people this could happen to, but I very much do. And what I know now that I didn't know then is it happens much more often than we know, much more often than we hear about, either directly or indirectly. And I didn't find that. Going back to what we find in art, I didn't necessarily know that until I got in there and felt those things. And I find my feelings through writing, through singing, through going back to the yoga mat, through hearing music. I wrote about it again in my latest book, A Dream He Talks to Me. The last piece is based on my hearing a His Golden Messenger song called Terms of Surrender. I'm not sure I would have ended where I ended had that song not come into my life, because it told me something. Art tells us, art shows us who we are, because at the end of the day, we're not all that different. I'm not that different from you. Our stories may be completely different, but our feelings probably are not. You probably know plenty of people who understand how I felt seeing that picture of me with the pork chop, because a million different things can happen. But as human beings, we have common themes. And that's what we're getting to when we make art, when we're showing each other. And art can be anything, but it's always somehow involving our experience.
The book comes out in 2019, along with a record. And I think it should be noted, in between 2012 and 2019, you also put out 2 records, one with your sister.
I know. What was that? John Henry really spurred my most creative decade. You would think that as a mama of a child that has special needs and all the stuff that is required around that I would not have made as much art as I did, but it worked in the opposite way for me.
What was the reception when the book came out?
I got many emails and letters from people thanking me for writing the book, because I had been able to articulate something that they had not been able to articulate. I did a very short tour when that book came out, because I had the record that went with it as well. I had a reason to go out and play those songs and talk about the book. And the lines after the shows were very long. People want to tell their stories. People are so grateful when they feel like someone sees them and hears them. And again, that's why art is so important. It gives people a way to know not only how they feel or how to describe how they feel, but a way to not feel alone. So I feel grateful for that, for knowing that I could somehow turn a tragedy. Can't call it anything but a tragedy. What happened to my parents? What happened to our family? That I could turn that into something that made someone else feel better is more gift than I can imagine.
We touched on church, but you mentioned God a handful of times in the book. One passage in particular: I was never more utterly alone than on the day Daddy finally killed her, just as I was always afraid he would. God wasn't anywhere around that day that I could tell, and he certainly wasn't carrying me. I'm not sure where I am with God these days. I pray now, if for no other reason, just in case. Can I be angry and simultaneously admit the miracle of my every breath?
Mm.
In 2019, in an interview with Terry Gross, he said, I believe in God more now than I've ever believed in God.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you now?
That kid who felt alone when she was 14 got better. And I got better because of the grace of a lot of people in my life. And because I made it my business to figure out more about God. And I'm no scholar. This is all done in the spaces. I want to feel spiritually. I want to feel spiritually. That's a statement on its own, but I want to feel okay spiritually. I want to feel like I am not sleepwalking through my life. I think one of the reasons I have wanted to be an artist is because of the feeling I get when I hook into something and I can find my feelings, I can find myself, and I can find the depth I'm looking for. That's God to me. That's God coming through me. That's God being in me. The messages that I got about what God was when I was 14, when I had those thoughts about being utterly alone, about being pissed, came from very typical Christian messages. Go to church or the devil will get you. Do right. Go by the commandments. Do this, do that. Don't have sex. Don't drink. Don't smoke. Don't do all the things you're not supposed to do. Meanwhile, all this crap's going on around me. What I'm hearing is not what I'm seeing. I very much rejected those notions. I don't think people are bad and need to be redeemed. I think people need to be loved and accepted. And I think the best thing about going down any road spiritually is if you look hard enough, that's what you're going to find is love and acceptance and comfort, not you're going to hell. In South Alabama, at the time I grew up, there was a lot of hell, and heaven was something that you earned by not asking for anything, by not being loud, by not expressing yourself, by suffering. Exploring suffering has taught me a lot. Exploring what the scholars say about suffering is interesting to me. Getting down into who Jesus was and Buddhism and reading Richard Rohr, reading about Mary Magdalene, digging. I love all that stuff. I think it's fascinating. Some of the best stories in the world are in that stuff. I finally realized that I'm a child of God and it's okay that I'm here. It doesn't matter if I ever do another damn thing. God to me is a presence. And I feel that presence when I'm able to hook in, when I drop down and I find myself. And my truest self is a creative, open, thinking, feeling, loving person.
The book is about your family. It centers around a specific event. But for me, reading it, it's really about you and it's about your experience. And one passage that I want to read that jumped out to me. It seems as if I've spent my life just trying to be okay. It took me a while to develop some semblance of what that means to me and how to get it. As with most of us, it's day to day. Standing still when I find it and appreciating the miracle of that accomplishment instead of just rushing to the next thing is the charge. Becoming wise enough to know that I'll remain at least somewhat broken and letting go of the idea that I shouldn't be is another one. What have you learned about yourself writing this book?
I have a funny story to relate to you. So my sister is writing a memoir. I'm so glad. She's a brilliant writer. We were talking on the phone. We talk most days. We're very, very close. It's a wonderful, wonderful gift to have her in my life. We were talking yesterday and she said, I got to put all this in order. I said, I'm just telling her, because I've been through this process. I'm just giving her tips on you should do this or you shouldn't do that or wait on that or you're going to have to change that. So don't do it now, blah, blah, blah. But she said, well, I wrote the intro. She told me about the intro and something I said to her is in it. And I said, oh my God. I said, I'm so flattered I get to be in the intro of the book. She had written about a story about us being on the phone. And she had gone to the post office and she was angry and she couldn't figure out why she was angry. And she was mad at herself for being angry. And what I said to her was, Give yourself a break. Your parents died in the front yard of your house. It's okay for you to feel these feelings, you know? I'm in this place in my life that feels transitional. I've been working really hard for a long time. And when you talk about, oh, you also made 2 records and you did 2 books, 3 records, all of this work I've done, which, pales in comparison to some people's output. But when I look at it, when I can get outside of myself and not be me for a second and look at it, I go, that's kind of an interesting trajectory that you followed. And you've done a lot of work and done a lot of stuff. And you've traveled and you've seen and you've absorbed and done a lot of stuff. I'm sorry to say that I've missed most of it. I think it's impossible not to. And this is one of the great ironies of life. We don't realize how to live until we don't have very much time left. Here I am, almost 50 years old. I'll be 50 next year. And I'm just now realizing that I've just been running my entire life. I've been running. I've been trying to escape my feelings and myself and my story and my history and that shame we talked about and that guilt and all of those things that I felt and had every right to feel. I've been being selfish. I've been being self-centered. I've been being self-obsessed. I've been focusing on the wrong things. When I Dream He Talks to Me was released in October of this year, a giant pause button appeared to me. It's really like the screen came down from a cloud. It rolled down in front of me and it said pause. And I like it. The thing that is telling me is that my artwork has to shift and my artwork becomes a lot more focused on living, taking care of my family, being available to my friends and my family and not escaping life because I've got my head down making work. My friend Mary Gaucher said this to me Sunday morning. She said, I feel like we've planted the garden and now we need to let it grow. And Mary, I love you. You're exactly right. And whether or not my garden is worth a damn, it's my garden. And it may be scraggly and weedy and rocky and gravelly, and Lord knows it is. There'll be a couple pretty things in there. And it feels good to me to allow myself to inhale for real, deeply, and to start to exhale. I'm supported in that by my community, by my husband, who looks at me and says, would you please take a break? You need it. It has taken me all this time to get there. So when you read that to me, I think that's really honest. I think that's really honest, especially the part about we can't show up 100% all the time. It's a lot of stops and starts. I'm trying my best to become a good student of meditation because it's, to me, the greatest metaphor there is. You drift and you start again. And you drift and you start again and again. And no, you do not pass go. No, you do not collect $200. You start at the beginning with every breath. That is mind-blowing to me. What an art that is. That's God. It's cool.
We've spoken off mic about my appreciation for your honesty in the book, and specifically your inclination to not wrap things up in a neat little bow, which I think is so often, unfortunately, people's inclination. And a word that comes up in the book several times is forgiveness. Can you forgive your parents?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know that I got there before I became a parent. I let go of so much when I did, when I became a mama, and I realized how much struggle there is in parenting, how hard it is to always do the right thing, how hard it is to always put that child first. And you don't always. That's the truth. If anybody says that they do is probably not being honest. You know, we don't come here knowing how to do this. Some of us, I think, are further evolved than others. We come that way. with whatever baggage we have from whatever we have. We're all learning as we go. And, being able to be my son's mama allowed me to see my father as a boy. It allowed me to see my mama as a girl. It's also allowed me to see myself as a girl, as a baby, to want to wrap us all up and take care of us all in the ways that we should have been taken care of is overwhelming to me as a feeling. And I have my son to thank for showing me that. He has given me new eyes. It didn't happen immediately. Of course it didn't. I had to learn all these things. And I'm a stubborn, hard-headed, don't want to learn anything but what I know already. And I'd like to learn that again, please. Confirmation bias is real. Forgiveness is the greatest power we have. Lets us be free. So yeah, wholeheartedly.
How do you define success?
Freedom.
Are you successful on your terms?
Mostly.
How do you define failure?
Lying to myself.
Can you name a failure, whether personally or professionally, that ultimately set you up for success?
I have never, ever been anything but a commercial failure. I mean, flat out costs a lot of big companies a lot of money. And, there's part of me that feels really badly about that. I did not really understand that part of my job, to be honest with you. When I started making records in the 90s, I missed the memo about trying to do something that was going to be commercially successful. I was, in some ways, belligerent and angry that anybody cared about that at all. I had this entitled attitude about being able to do what I wanted to do, a very young person's attitude. When I look back on those years, I sort of cringe at my hubris, and I'm grateful for the opportunities. And I also know that had I been successful, my life would be different. Maybe it would be great. Maybe it would not be. I don't know. That's not to say. I'm not going to try to wrap it up and say, oh, well, all of those mistakes made me who I am today. Well, who I am today, some days that's great. Some days it isn't. It all just ends up being what it is. And you can't try to pick it apart and break it down like that, because the truth is, as far as I'm concerned, is we're very unaware of most things. It took me a very long time to begin to understand that I needed to try to connect those dots, that I needed to dig deeper into my own experience and to the experiences of those around me. I did not always understand that I was not necessarily creating a positive environment. I had no idea how to do that, because what I was doing and what I did for a very long time was just try to protect myself, just try to stay safe in a very untrusting terrain. I have no ability to trust. That's my biggest task in life, was learning how to trust not only other human beings, but the world. So start there, that'll mess you up when you're operating as someone who thinks everything and everyone is untrustworthy.
You trust yourself?
I don't think I trusted myself then. I was talking about this the other day in that memoir workshop I was doing. I was talking about giving yourself freedom as a writer to experiment, to sort of go down rabbit holes and go into places that you did not think your writing would go, and that's okay. And sometimes it's great. And as a reader, sometimes a wormhole is fantastic. We don't get there until we trust ourselves enough as writers. I don't think I had very much trust in myself until recently. It took me a long time to get any kind of grasp on my tools. I was just trying to be okay, not necessarily do as well as I could have.
How do you define happiness?
I define happiness as something you can feel one moment and be grateful for, and it'll be gone the next, and you'll just look forward to it coming again. Happiness is a fleeting emotion. Contentment is something I'm more familiar with. Happy to me is like joy, and it's, it shows up and it's fun, and then it's like, yeah, see ya. But contentment being okay with what is, but also being able to look toward improvement when it makes sense to grasp it is, I think, a good place to be. Like, I don't want to become stagnant. I don't ever want to become self-satisfied. I want to be okay with where I am and also okay with allowing myself to experiment with getting better.
What would you say to 18-year-old Allison?
Honey, you're going to figure out that nothing is black and white. And you're going to figure out that if you stop being so hard on yourself, you'll be able to stop being so hard on everybody else.
How would you describe what you do for a living?
That's so funny. Sometimes I get paid to be me. That's how I would describe it.
Allison Moorer, thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you, Noah.
The Days Between is a production of Noah Abrams Studio. Story editing by Andrew Henry. Mixing and mastering by Mai Ikoshima. Website and design by John Fisher. Theme music is by Evo. The Days Between can be found online at www.thedaysbetweenpodcast.com and on Instagram at The Days Between Podcast. My name is Noah Abrams. Thanks for listening.